Hi, I'm Darth Brandybuck, and this is Othais. He graciously agreed to spend some time with me and chat about some weird guns, so Othais, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Now, as a reminder for those of you who might not know, Othais is the mind behind the C&Rsenal channel. And Othais, you've been in the game for going on, 10 years now?
Basically, yes. We did have some... I was known for photography and writing before that, but we made the jump to video when it became clear that that's the only real way to reach people now.
Sure. So I guess the question then is, was that the extent of your experience with firearms before starting the channel, or, what kind of led you to exclusively go to video?
Well, I guess it's two separate questions. What got me into being a presenter for firearms history was basically my own curiosity. I was a fairly late comer to the firearms game, and at the time Mosins were popular, and they're
back when they were $100.
I still run into this, but people are like, what does this marking mean and what does that marking mean? And a lot of them it's various inventory proof, whatever, it depends, right? And there's not always a clear answer for every single marking, but at the time, how do I put this, if you were to look up a Springfield 1903, they would have explained in detail how that rifle evolved, and you could see the evolution of the gas checks, the evolution of the front locking lug, the way the magazine's structured, why they did X, Y, and Z. The Mosin, you would look for those answers, and you would just get back this weird blarb about it being so simple and so Soviet and blah blah blah. But it's not Soviet; it's imperialist, and it's not simple. It's one of the most complex bolt-action rifles of its era, seemingly for no reason. Like, as somebody that had a rudimentary understanding of engineering, I looked at it and went, I don't understand. I don't know what I'm doing, and I feel like I could have designed this better. And then you start looking at other guns and you go, well, they are way better engineered than this. And so it always kind of bothered me. And with that in mind, I just kind of kept looking into other firearms. And for many years, I actually never knew why the Mosin was the way it was. It's actually only been, I think, like the past 6 years that a gentleman named Chumak came out with a book in Russian that actually does explain how it evolved piece by piece. And now it makes sense, because it's like, well, the Russians had this system where they would choose what they were doing for one function of the gun, lock it in, declare that done, and then add the next piece, which is completely the opposite of a John Browning, where it's like everything's supposed to mesh together and work at once holistically. It's incremental versus holistic. So I guess it's a long way to say this, but that's what got my curiosity up, because I had this sort of unsolved puzzle in front of me, and it made me want to sort of read and talk. And then I did that in text and photos, and then I did it in video because it was easier to communicate over video. Also, I could communicate more in video. To be honest with you, a lot of it being mechanism-based, being able to animate, originally in 2D, now in 3D.
It's easier to show how it works.
Yeah, still photos of moving processes are not great.
So was that why because you kind of almost exclusively focus on curio and relic guns, was that why, just because of the weird mechanisms of that era, or what about that class of guns is so fascinating to you?
Well, for me, I think I've said this a number of times, but have you ever heard the description of gravity as being a rubber sheet? And the more mass you put on the rubber sheet, the more it's deformed. It's not a perfect analogy for gravity, but it's a pretty good one for a sense of history, which is that an 8-pound modern rifle bought commercially for hunting deer or whatever, doesn't have the same gravity as an 8-pound military rifle from the First World War. They're the same weight. They have similar ballistic properties. They're similar modern utility. And yet there's something more. And the more is the what ifs, the what was, the bigger picture of, why and how. There's a whole human story that goes along with the historical arm. And so it almost becomes a lens through which you can see a bigger picture of what was happening at the time.
That is a really good way of looking at it. I like that.
That old stuff smells good.
That is very true. Have you ever been approached by filmmakers or game producers about some of the guns? I'm thinking of like Battlefield 1, which is a World War I game.
So we put music underneath all our shooting segments because people were lifting the audio.
Really?
Yes, which technically is copyrighted. That's ours, because we use a multi-layered microphone setup. And We got into so many fights about this that I finally like gave up. Although I'm still willing to go sue somebody if I catch them using my audio. But I would get emailed every month from like either indie devs or even some of the big studios being like, "Hey, we want to use this audio, but you put this music under it." Like it wasn't even like, "Can we license it?" It was just like, "Hey, did you have a copy of this without the music under it?" And I'm like, "Is that because you're trying to use it for their game?" And they go, "Yeah." And I'd be like, "Okay, so that's copyrighted to me. So do you want to license it?" And they're like, "Well, I don't have any money." Like, so they're just openly wanting to rip us off. There's one game company that did work with us with audio. We made a tacit agreement with them about how it was supposed to work for credit. It ended up being worthless to us. And then, so they came around for round 2, and I went, it was less than worthless to us last time. It was a huge effort. So then they paid us for round 2, and then it still wasn't worth it for what they were willing to pay. So we just ignored them for round 3. Because it's like they want everything for so cheap, and you're just going, you have no idea how difficult it is to isolate audio the way you want it isolated. They don't come to me for advice. There was one game company that came to me ostensibly for advice. That's how they approached me. So I joined and I went, "Oh, your animations are like really wrong." And then they're like, "Well, actually, we really want to talk to you about audio." So again, they were just trying to get the audio files.
They just wanted
and
an
they
in.
just invited me, right? And so I went, "Oh, okay, well, what are you paying for those?" And they're just, they're like, "Well, I was like, "Okay, we're going to put your name all over it, put your name all over it." And I'm going, "Okay, but I don't want my name all over an incorrect product. Like, I don't want to be associated with these loading animations in which somebody like, dude, the 1911 reload was the most disgusting thing I've ever, like, no one holds a 1911 that way. You know what I mean?" And I went, I don't want my name anywhere near that. "Well, how else would you do it?" And I was like, "This video in which we did it. Right here.
This video where we're very clearly demonstrating how to do it."
So what it was is all their modelers really liked us because I have those multi-directional images that we take. But they're like, their animator or animators apparently never watched a gosh darn thing we put out. So they were just like completely, I wish I had recorded how, because they changed a couple of them, thank God, but not all of them. And then somebody will probably figure out the game because they definitely did some changes based off of audience stuff, you know? But yeah. So I just left. Like, I was like, "Okay, well, nice talking to you. Bye." My problem is people will tell me you could save a lot of time by making the episodes only half an hour long instead of an hour long. And I try desperately to explain to them, I have to do the same amount of research no matter what in order to understand the firearm. So it saves me nothing on the research time. And then I have to decide what to keep and ditch, and essentially I have to compress the story. So that's like doing like almost like a screenplay based off a script. So that means more time to write the script. But when we film, we use a teleprompter. So if I record a half-hour episode instead of an hour episode, there's a margin of error of probably like less than 5% of minutes wasted, you know, when I have to reread stuff, you know? So you've saved me half an hour at the expense of several more hours of writing. Like the longer episode is actually easier, unless I'm willing to cut out. Unless I'm willing to read Wikipedia and shoot from the hip, and that's the end of it. You know what I mean? And then people are like, "Well, just break it up into multiple episodes for one episode," and the fall off rate's insane. And also, it just irritates the people that were paying it anyway. Like I would perform better on YouTube if I took every episode and broke it into 3 pieces. But then I'm sacrificing the people who are donating to us in order to get performance gains on YouTube. And so my first priority has always, and it kind of sucks because I could make more money by being greasier to the people that are supporting us, but I can't do it. Like I have this agreement with these people that I am doing my level best to use their money to get this done for them. So I'm not made in such a way where I can sit there and be like, well, maybe I could shill them some garbage while I'm at it. You know, we have one sponsor, it's Ballistol. I've always used it. It's great. Like, and they don't, you know, it's not a huge contract with them or anything. They're not paying for, you know, half of an episode even. It's not money. It's just a little extra that we got in because we already were using the product, so we felt safe, you know, telling people to use the product. I've had offers for all sorts of stuff. Most channels of my size are making 3 times my income because they're shilling garbage. And you'll never see me put one of those ridiculous cell phone games that are essentially like, I mean, those things are predatory.
So, How far back in like the timeline of firearms engineering, how old of a gun would you be willing to cover on the channel?
Oh, anything. I've got side plans for all sorts of stuff that I'd like to talk about, all the way back to matchlocks and things like that. It's just a matter of what you want to talk about and how you can. The problem we have is that the way we've done the primary series so far, it really lends itself to the serial manufacture of firearms, because you have this, okay, here is the man or men that developed this particular firearm. Here is why they developed it for this use case. And then here is how it was produced at what time and by what measures for how long, that sort of thing. Almost all of that goes out the window when you want to talk about, say, really, like if you want to talk about matchlocks even, that gets very difficult, because it's going to be a lot of sort of regional, individual shop manufacture, all sorts of artisans involved. The reasons for manufacturing them slightly different from other matchlocks are kind of lost to time. You can talk generally about certain grip shapes and what they were doing with them, but it's almost like some of it was by repetition and not by consideration. There is a difference.
And everybody that made it a little differently, and
right. And so there's this thing of like, you have the artisanal and then you have the industrial. And unfortunately, our format lends itself more to the industrial. Not that I'm opposed to talking about the artisanal, but the problem is then I have to speak of a sort of grander picture that actually lasts for a lot longer each time. When you're talking about a modern post-industrialization firearm, you're talking about one that has a lifespan of somewhere around like 10 to 60 years. And people will brag about Mauser still being on the front lines 100-something years later, but realistically, they're out of service life within 60, 70 years, which is a long time, given most of them are out of service inside of 20 or 30. So, for a matchlock, when you're trying to talk about something that had a couple centuries of use, because now you can't really get it down to one smaller story. You kind of have to tell this.
When there's less information to dial in on that specific model, it's harder to tell the significance of it. Yeah.
Now, in that regard, if I want to tell like a good matchlock story, I wanted to tell that would be like the Tanegashima in Japan. So that's a gun that has several sort of fixed iterations in terms of heavy, light, whatever. Like there are variations of the Tanegashima that are named in Japan. And so if we wanted to do like a 2-episode bit on that, then I can work with someone over there. There's actually a gentleman on Twitter. I forgot his Twitter name now, but I've spoken to him a couple times. It's not impossible to sort of arrange something there where we could talk about the history of the Tanegashima as it relates to Japan, which is very interesting because of its anachronism too. But that at least gives us a narrative we can work with. We're not just talking about quote unquote matchlocks. We're talking about this matchlock. A lot of people, it's so funny because we talk about this samurai. It's like, no, the Japanese use guns. They use
basically as soon as the guns showed up, they were like, yes, please.
Yeah. Whenever Japan actually wanted to win a war instead of having a ceremonial war, they would use whatever was at hand. It's just that they also got into circles of like, well, we're just doing this because this is what we do.
And that kind of led to when everyone else was starting to use flintlocks and cap locks, they were like, no, we'll stick to the matchlocks for now. We like them.
There is an element of like, this is what we have, and there's also an element of if you can't produce percussion caps at home, you become dependent on a foreign power.
Right.
And I wonder, I haven't dug into it, but I wonder how much of that is what happens. You see it with African trade guns. I really wish I could, this was years before we even did the video series. I ran into an article on African trade guns, and you wouldn't exactly call it a PC article, but they were taking selections from someone that was involved in the gun trade in Africa during the slave years. And I'm not deep read into this, but it was an interesting article because you realize like, oh, this has way more to do with the context in which they live than, the utility of the firearm itself. From the Western perspective, most of what they were doing to trade guns was performative, not like it was a display to other members of their community. It was not a utility for the bush. You think if you approach a country and start trading for these kind of things, you think that they're going to use them purely utility. Like you don't really think of them, or maybe you think of them in warfare as another type of utility, but it was almost neither. It was the immediate response was like, look what I got, which is honestly how we use them today most of the time. I'm going to tell you, just like as collectors, I'm like, no, I get the feeling. Like look at this one, it's louder than the other one.
That's very true. It's a universal motive behind collecting. So I guess on the flip side of that initial question, how far forward in time would you be willing to go to cover a gun?
That's iffy. Like I'm weighing as going as far forward as the 1980s, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
We're willing to go post World War II as we've already done. It's just the problem is you run into contemporary arguments, and people cannot let go of contemporary arguments, and they get into such. I don't know how to explain it. It goes back to the utility thing that we were just talking about, because then all of a sudden utility is on the bar again, and people are going, well, when I was in, we had bank, 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 bank. And it's not really, it's weird, but that's not the story we usually tell, because from World War I and World War II, you actually don't have a whole ton of personal accounts of this model of rifle doing X, Y, and Z. People tend to say my rifle, my pistol, my revolver, and not really name the manufacturer when they're accounting what happened in the war, because to them that's what they were issued, that's what they had. They didn't think about it as a model. Nowadays, most former servicemen tend to be like, oh, I had this with this configuration. Like, they know the gun and every accessory. They're doing clone builds when they get out. And so the nuance in what they want to talk about gets a little extreme. And then also, to be honest with you, we've gone really small batch in our small arms. Like, the US alone, with the number of different types of rifle and handgun and everything that they've issued over the past 40 years, and then this group has this and that group has that, and then this modification was made here, and if you don't mention all of them, you're going to get inundated. So it gets a little complex.
I understand. Just the closer you get to modern times, the more personal opinions are going to come after you.
Right. For the collector side, it's just was it really that smart of an idea to have both the Springfield 1903 and the 1917 in one army? That's 2 rifles. Now it's okay, so here's all the different AR things that we have.
All the different AR variants we use, yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of collection, I know obviously you have quite an extensive collection, and you rely a lot on fans or friends lending you guns, but...
Yes, I do not own everything in this room even. There's, I don't know if anybody's a hoarder out there or knows a hoarder, but there's a couple of guys in town who are happy to not have to have another full closet. They're just can I just leave this at your house? And it's yeah, okay.
I would imagine that some of the guns that you cover are probably really hard to find. So for stuff that you can't just, find at a pawn shop or online, how hard has it been to get certain guns?
Extremely. To be honest with you, you don't see the ones that are truly hard to find because we haven't done the episodes yet. And then there's also ones that just have logistical issues. We have a standing offer for, say, the Navy Lee, but we want to put that into context, so we want to do the Remington Lee alongside of it. And then in trying to do the Remington Lee, it's well, should we talk about the Hotchkiss, bolt actions? And then this creates a sort of nest of, oh, I need to set aside time, capacity, and enough personal favors to get all these in within 4 months of each other, so that we can kind of get this one big narrative going. And so the harder part isn't necessarily finding a rare piece, it's finding a collection of rare pieces, or an efficient way of getting them around, especially now with shipping being as bad as it is in many ways, reinforcing the shipping. We spend an inordinate amount of money on shipping because we'll ship with hard case with reinforcements. There's none of this wrapped up in styrofoam and just sort of in a box, because it doesn't, you guys know, it doesn't work. The bolt handles come ripping through, the stocks get broken. It's got to be, I have fallen in love with the very firm, I don't know what to call it, it's a super thick cardboard that comes in a L shape.
Yeah, it's halfway between cardboard and plywood almost.
Yeah. You can get 2 pieces of that and wrap it around a wrist of a stock and duct tape the crap out of it, and then throw that in a hard case, and then that should be enough to get through shipping pretty well, actually, because then you've got a reinforcer right at the wrist for impact, because that's almost always where they nail you.
Have you ever had to get custom ammo made so that you can demonstrate the guns? How do you have an ammo guy that...
We've had several. Right now we have an ammo girl. Suze took over most of that. But we used to have Jay around, he got busy. We used to have David around, he got busy. And then, to be honest with you, it's gotten really fiddly custom. And so a lot of what we're doing requires, lathe operation and things like that to get it nestled into where we want to be. I personally have been kind of working on Bloke's method for pinfire so that we can get into that one day. But of course, the problem is having time. The problem is having more than one of me, because I mean, there's so many things I could have done if I could take a week off of my normal duties and just go do them. But the overhead for the show is insane. Custom ammo is wild. We had to call in a ton of favors trying to do the Comblane cartridge, because there was no die available. So then we had to get someone to make us a die, which wasn't perfect, but it got us far enough that we could use another die to kind of shoehorn it in there. So we managed to fudge the Comblane cartridge together. That was probably the worst one so far, but there's other stuff in the works that I think is going to give me trouble.
So, okay, well that brings up the next question. When you're creating the series or, planning the next video, how do you decide which guns to cover? Obviously you said, if it's, in a series or there's, this gun requires the context of this gun, but do you base that more on what guns you can get your hand on, or do you say, oh, I want to cover this gun and then look around for it?
Yes.
Okay.
I have laundry, I have a massive, I used to run it on a spreadsheet, but it got a little hard. So now I run it on a Word document that's almost like a spreadsheet. It's very difficult to explain. But essentially I have clusters of things that are related to each other that I kind of vaguely have so almost like a hand-typed relational database at this point. And then so they're in little clusters, and they'll be marked out in terms of what I have. Do I have access to the firearm? Who do I have it access to? Do I have access to the ammunition? If not, how difficult it is to construct what I need for the ammunition? There's a whole breakdown. And so there's essentially a priority list that has, don't forget to look out for these things when you're at gun shows. Don't forget to look out for these when you're talking to collectors. And then every once in a while you get it stacked up just right, and there's one piece missing. And then I go back and I look at the sheet and I go, oh, okay, now that it's stacked up like this, we can go flex some money or time to solve that one problem, and all the dominoes fall in, and boom, we're making this series of episodes. So I basically have a wish list of stuff piled up. Right now we're suffering because there's another factor in when to release things, which is, you wouldn't think about it, it's like time of year. Views just aren't as good during certain times of year. There's also, right now we're redoing the studio, which is a huge project, and to be honest with you, I'm trying not to start pulling a bunch of high view World War II. You're not going to see the M1 Garand until the new studio, because it's going to be a waste. I'm going to do the M1 Garand on the old studio format like this, and then a week later we're going to be on a new format, and people are going to still be streaming in to see this thing, and they're going to go, wait, why did this show change? And so and I should say, for those that don't know, the studio format change is really just a visual change, but people respond. If you're listening to this, you're probably not the kind of person that's deeply entwined in just sort of the cursory visuals of things, but most people do respond to visuals very strongly. So we're kind of doing a reskin of the show to help people who don't understand the show understand it faster. And it won't affect people that are used to the show, other than it'll be a different set. And there'll be some graphical changes, but they're not going to, everything that you're familiar with is going to be there. It's just going to be in a better package. The problem is the current package doesn't convey to people exactly what we're doing in the first 5 seconds. And so we're trying to sort of reskin to do that.
Get their attention before it's too late.
Right. So right now I'm doing a bunch of weird stuff. So I've kind of wandered into some interwar things or less critical things that aren't going to get as many views, but keep the patrons happy, because I've really tailored the next couple episodes and the ones that we've been doing to be of the most interest, but the least. The guys who buy in are the guys that are like, I want to know what's going on with the Type I, And we're trying to do the Manchurian Mauser. We're trying to do the Yugoslavian conversions of the Mannlicher to 8mm. Those are very interesting guns because they're at the intersection of several things. The intersection of several things is not what the general public understands at all. So they're really good topics for me to cover while we're getting the new studio set up that's going to be more appealing to the general public.
Do you still have the Alof's shotgun?
I do. I bought that for so cheap. That's actually mine. And then I did that video and it blew up. And then they added a Hunt Showdown because of the video.
Okay, so that's what I was going to say. From what I looked around, I think that your video is one of, if not the first video that shows it.
Ian had one and briefly mentioned it, but it was like, yeah, I need to film a video about that.
Mm-hmm.
And just sort of casually showed it from afar or something like that. And then forgot all about it. All I knew is I found this thing while we were doing our shotgun research, because we were trying to do a shotgun series. which is technically now in production, although it's already becoming a problem. So I thought repeating shotguns are more interesting than people realize. I started, poking around at them. I infected, actually, Ivan, the troll, was infected by me, so now he's like a shotgun guy. But the Alof was something I bumbled into and went, oh, I'm gonna have to keep an eye out for one of these. So I bought that one for like $400 or something.
Wow.
And now, that'll never be the price for those again.
There's a company, I think, in Canada or something that makes like modern remakes of them.
Yeah, I tried, when they first showed it, I tried contacting them. Like, I sent email to support and I was like, give me a sample, because if you're gonna sell these in North America, let me compare it to the original one. Like, because I think they're charging, I want to say they're like $300 or less. So it's just like, yeah, just give me one, and I'm gonna let me just film them together, because it's within our wheelhouse to be like, hey, somebody made one, you can play with one yourself now.
So it's probably safe to say that you are largely responsible for bringing the Alofs into the kind of the public eye over the last few years.
Yeah, can you imagine you make this thing, nobody really cares about it, it vanishes, you're dead now, but 100 years later, some idiot's like, this was kind of cool, and then everybody goes, holy crap. The funniest part is you're the first person to notice that we were the ones that kind of put it back out there. Everybody talks about the Alofs, and within, I can't remember, it was like a month or two later, Ian finally did his video on the Alofs, and then within months of that, everyone was linking back.
It was on all the Reddit pages and everything.
Yeah, he gets all the credit for it. I'm like, okay, that's fine.
Well, the thing was, is when I initially saw that first Alof video where you're like on your porch just showing it off with the snap caps, I didn't realize at first that it was you, because I think I found someone posted it to like Facebook or Reddit, and then all of a sudden like, oh, this is C&Rsenal.
Yeah, it was like our version of it got like 20 million views on Facebook alone, let alone on YouTube and everything else. And then, but it just got ripped to every corner of the internet, and no one cited where it came from, which is fair, because I do this thing that's really stupid. I don't put myself in front of the camera. However, at some level, we need a brand identity, because we have to drive people to help us fundraise for doing what we do. So I always screw that up. Like, I'm really bad about trying to put myself first instead of because I want to show you the cool thing. I don't want to show you me. Like, I'm here just because I gotta be. Somebody's got to show you,
Several years back, speaking of Ian, y'all did the Project Lightning, which was, for those of you who may not know watching, it was a project that they did several years ago where they took, was it 7 different machine guns from World War I?
It was basically every light machine gun except the Bergman. Remember we were talking earlier about how I pick what we're going to cover? Mm-hmm. It was one of those things where I looked at my list of connections for certain things, and I went, wait a second. If I could just find these 2 other things, I know someone with one of every light machine gun except this one. And then so I hollered at Ian, I was like, do you know anybody that has these 2? And he goes, yes, I do. And I went, done. Like, let's do it. So then we pulled that project together. To be honest with you, I wish we had him fly in for an extra day or 2. We were both a little ambitious with how easy it was going to be. How
long did it take to produce that whole thing? Because you released it over the course of a couple months, but...
That is the lowest point in C&Rsenal history. It's, by the way, at the front of this, I want to say something, because people have a hard time understanding when you complain about something going awry that you're somehow negative about the people involved or what's going on. Ian was a star. Like, I've had to work with, well, not had to, but I've chosen to work with a number of people. Ian is the most by-the-book, business-oriented guy I've worked with, which works for me, because we say, here's what we're going to do. And then to the best of his ability, with 100% of his effort, he goes through the process that he agreed to do. So in that regard, we worked very well together. The problem is, a couple things happened. One, we made too few days of filming, and we ended up cutting 2 segments that really weren't that critical anyway. But a big thing that went wrong is, essentially, we would go out to the range and film outdoors on this 700-yard range. Or no, at that time it was the 100-yard range. It wasn't even the big range. We're driving about like 50 minutes out. Then a couple of times we had to come back and film indoors, like the reloading test and everything. That was to give us more time. And then what May and I forgot to account for was unloading the cards and checking that we had all the footage, because something could go wrong with the cards. So then, everybody laughs at me for Project Lightning, because I start to dog, Ian, May, and I look fairly competent at the beginning, and then the more you get into the test, the more Ian's just radically outperforming us, especially me. And what was happening is Ian was going to bed and getting 6 to 8 hours of sleep every night at his hotel, And I was staying up the entire night. I had 4 hours of sleep for the entire 3 days that we were filming. And so I'm still out on the range performing and shooting and going back and checking the camera. Like, it was unfortunately it was on me and May to change out the cameras because Ian doesn't run our cameras. It's not fair to say he should. He doesn't. It's not his camera. He just had to wait and then get in position. No, he didn't do nothing. He would help the other guys. That we had some volunteers helping us load mags and everything. Like, he didn't do nothing. So I don't want to act like he got to sit back in his sun chair, but like May and I were on focus for 3 days straight. And especially me, because I made her go to sleep because she functions worse without sleep than I do. So I would make her get at least 5-6 hours.
You got the most authentic World War I soldier experience. When's rough. Project Lightning World War II edition? Never.
Yeah, I'll get right on that. And it's one of those things where it's very difficult. And the other things people don't understand, that sort of like the, how do I put it, like the goodwill capital of trying to get all those things in one place. Trying to do light machine guns in World War II would be easier in many regards than World War I, when that might make it more approachable. The other thing is we now have essentially better facilities for doing this. So it is possible to try it again, but we'd be trying it again with significant efficiencies built in that we now are aware of. The project itself as it was, and trying to repeat it immediately the next year or something, was impossible.
With all of those different guns and all these different technologies, I mean, most of the stuff you look at are 100+ years old. So compared to like modern technologies, modern firearm mechanisms, obviously modern perspectives affect the way we look back at them, but I'm sure there's a lot of maybe misunderstandings or misconceptions because of modern technology on older guns.
Technology sometimes changes so that you have another patent to leech off of for 30 years or whatever, depending on the country.
Okay.
But a lot of times people just get the old stuff and throw it out because they want to have something that there's a lot of good technology that was never used because no one could lay claim to the patent. And if no one could make money on it, then no one was there to champion it. Repeating handguns, the revolver as a sidearm, only entered military service because Samuel Colt had a personal financial stake in it and ran around beating everyone over the head until it was adopted. Like, you probably would have, I don't know if you would have seen a revolver adopted by any military in the world until cartridges were developed. If it weren't for Samuel Colt going around being like, no, this is important, and just badgering the shit out of everybody. So there is a lot of stuff doesn't happen in the human world unless there is someone championing it to happen. There's all sorts of great technology. There's all sorts of, there's lots of things with medical potential right now that get abandoned because the patents are expired, so no one pays for the studies to find out whether it's worth it or not, because how do you make your money back if you don't have a patent on the thing? So, like, the same is true of the firearms industry and anything else. You have to have sort of a financial incentive to push the technology. But if you're talking about whether or not firearm construction today is better or worse than before, firearms construction today is min-maxed, is what it really is. It's using the minimum materials and cost possible for the most benefit. Whereas before they'd be like, well, we'll just make the receiver out of steel, And that's not to say they weren't cognizant of trying to save money, but it just seems like there were far more decisions around robustness than there were around, cost cutting. If we look at modern firearms, there's essentially two types of modern firearm in my mind. There's firearms built for, how do I explain this, rapid development and release. And then there's firearms built for dedicated hard service that are implied to have a built-in contract. What I mean by that is, whenever, let's say Henry goes to design a new lever action, they're going to have a myriad of parts that are included simply because that spring or that pin or that whatever was immediately available from a Chinese source or wherever. And you look at it and you go, well, if you just made one part shaped like this, it would solve, these three things. And they go, yeah, but the cost of making that one part just for this gun in-house versus just farming out how, give me these two springs in this lever. That's what they do. So there's a lot of compromised guns in the market now where there's so many inbuilt inefficiencies because they're using essentially off-the-shelf parts. That is extremely common in the market today. It's almost, if you talk to any modern engineer that's developing accessories or firearms, they're going to tell you that's what they're doing. They constantly check to see what is available already to fit their dimensions, you know. The other thing is you have firearms that are designed from the ground up in which they're like, no, this structure of carrier, this structure of receiver, whatever, is exactly what we want. We've got it designed into the computer exactly the way we're going to have it. Now we're going to take that over and we're going to generate, 50,000 units of that off of this, milling and lathing and broaching operation, which that part of it is still the same as the old way. Generally, you're going to have some of both in most firearms these days. But there's definitely guns that are more specifically engineered and guns that are less specifically engineered. And you start to get a feel for it once you start talking to engineers and seeing what they're putting together. I guess there's a modularity that you don't imagine. Like there's, people think of modularity, they think of things that they can bolt on their AR, but there's actually a modularity of springs and pins and detents and things like that.
Are there any guns or mechanisms from the past that you don't see too much anymore that you think were better, or maybe some guns that were overshadowed by, Colt or so on, that kind of did stuff better and you think maybe could have or should have stuck around a little longer?
I'm not sure. I can't speak about the current gen, the very newest of the new, because again, I'm more historically oriented. But a good example I have is people will often say, what would John Browning say about the M16? Like that's a common quote. And the answer would be, it would depend on how old he was when he saw it. Because after the Winchester 1893 shotgun, he never made an open rear breech ever again. Like he stayed away from having an opening directly at the rear of the receiver. He always wanted an enclosed receiver. And that's because of metallurgy at the time, failures of cartridges, that sort of thing. Specific to shotguns, hang fires were a problem of early smokeless powder. A lot of people don't realize that. So there's a lot of weird stuff that happens in modern firearms where you create openings because you're so... It's weird, but a lot of modern firearms are designed more like the Mauser, where they kind of lock in the one feature and then the next. The AR, that rifle was supposed to have a charging handle over top in the carry handle.
The little ring hook thing?
Yeah. And when it came time, everybody's like, we don't want that. We that's awful. So then they've already got the machine set up and everything. So the most cost-effective thing they can do is put the charging handle at the rear like they did. And you guys know, the charging handle in the AR, if you compare, like, for modern shooters, they think nothing of it. But if you look in the context of every other firearm before the AR, the closest you're going to get to that is the BAR charging handle, where if you pull it back and you lock open, you're now under dead tension. You have to push it back forward. And just like the whole manual of arms on the AR is super bizarre in terms of charging compared to anything else, which is, by the way, why we have the whole forward assist argument. Like that whole thing cooks off. And the whole forward assist argument, to me, also stems from the fact that we have a lot of confidence in modern ammunition. And so people are like, if you had one of these in World War I, I'm like, it would be useless. The AR is not really well designed for case failures, especially with the charging hand in the rear like that. People are like, oh, it's not that bad. I'm like, okay, so when you put a suppressor on yours and you don't adjust anything, you get hot gas in your eye, right? And they're like, well, yeah, it blows a little hot gas, makes me kind of weep like onions. And I'm like, okay, so that's because the charging handle's at the rear, and you have an open port at the rear of the receiver. So that's a failure of the design. It's not like, oh, it's the end of the world. It's not like it didn't go and fight in wars. But this is true of all the old firearms we talk about. Many perfectly reasonable firearms are they fought 2 world wars, but they're inefficient for many reasons. I got a lot of crap on the 1911 episode for saying that the takedown for the 1911 is needlessly complicated. And everybody gave me hell and like, oh, it's so simple. And I went, that's weird. Because if you look at all these like 80s 1911 clones, they have no front barrel bushing, which is not only like easier to work with, but is also accurizing. They have a guide rod that actually sets the lock taller in there to accurize it, which is just a shape. You could have just done that from the beginning. Here they have a self-contained recoil spring, captive recoil spring that you can take out as a whole cell. Like there's all sorts of improvements that people have made to the 1911's takedown system because it was sort of the least developed part of that gun. And the same thing's true of the AR charging handle. It's sort of the least developed part of that gun. And again, this is why I don't cover modern stuff usually, is because people get really like personal about it because it's what they used.
I'm sure someone's gonna comment on this about what you just said.
Yeah, it's when you get into the engineering of it, you start looking at things, you start making connections that people really don't like to hear. Like the M1 Garand, I make everybody mad when I say like the M1 Garand is a gas conversion bolt action rifle. Like it's a rotating front locking bolt action rifle that should have had a bolt handle, and then if you delete, like if you take like a Steyr Mannlicher or something, and you just weld a rod onto the bolt handle and hook up a gas system, then you have this like plunger, gas operated plunger that then pushes on a camming action that then rotates the bolt head. Oh wait, it's not that different. Like now you've removed all the appendices. Like you've gone and removed every bit of unnecessary thing, but it's still a front locking, rotating.
It's like a simplified, oh gosh, what was it? It's like a super simplified Howell automatic.
I mean, in a way, yes. I mean, by the way, it's beautifully efficient, but it's clearly from that line of reasoning. You know what I mean? Whereas the SVT-40, let's say, is a gun that's descended from shotguns, which people don't like to hear either. Like the SVT-40 is descended from sort of the same thought that went into the earliest ancestor would probably be like the Colt 1895 potato digger, because it was a shelf locker, but it was a little more unusual than that. But if you think of a Marlin 1898 shotgun, that has a rear up and down locking thing that fits into the back of the receiver that is dang near on for almost all those semi-autos that you see in Europe all the way up to the FAL. And so that descends from an area of like, okay, we're taking this linear force and we're converting it into rotational unlocking of the breech. But the rotation is sort of an up and down flapper at the back, like a heel lock or something. I'm not sure what you would call it specifically. And so, but the problem with that is that's an inefficient system, because then you've got your locking surface at the back of the receiver, so you have to have this rigid receiver all the way forward. So that's not good either. So you eventually see autos move away from that. Like you have them trying to adapt what was in the market, and then you eventually get into, front locking, camming right at the front, sort of like almost gas derivatives of the K31 family in ways, and then from there you're up and moving into what we really consider modern. But people don't see it that way. They don't make those connections. They don't go, oh, wait a second, that is true. It was just a tipping block that was, operated by a pump. And if you just get the pump to run on gas, then you get the same thing,
Yeah, in a lot of the research I've been doing, I'm realizing just how so much was interconnected with just it, and like you said, totally what modern people who don't understand the depth wouldn't understand, that this technology inspired this mechanism, even though on the surface they look completely disconnected.
Well, I mean, usually design comes from incremental change, but people don't want to see that. They want to say, oh, he invented this. And they don't want to see where they combined a number of outstanding features into one product and then maybe added some efficiencies. Usually the invention isn't even actually adding a concept. It's usually adding an efficiency, which, by the way, I find to be very remarkable and I praise highly. But to be honest with you, even if you consider, okay, he invented a new concept or he invented a new efficiency, 9/10 of a good firearm isn't even any of that. It's actually building the firearm around the intended use case and then aggressively testing in that use case and refining all the problems. Everyone likes to say, oh, John Browning invented the Winchester 1897. No, he invented the 1893 and then abandoned it immediately. And the 1893 was hot garbage. Like it had a concept, conceptually there's something there, but it was not refined. Winchester took the 1893 and with their engineers added a bunch of inefficient looking things, like things that Browning would have never invented, like the release button at the rear and stuff. And they developed the 1897, and that turned into like an extremely successful gun all the way into the 50s, right? But that's because they refined it around the use case, and the core design wasn't necessarily that efficient and not necessarily that great. I mean, it is open breech rear. It's not the most efficient, I mean, you have to kick the bolt out the back because it has to have full travel. The locking system's not very efficient, but they refined it into such a usable thing that people really loved it. It's not a great shotgun, but it is because they made it one. And so there's a big difference between the core concept and then the execution of the concept. When they redesigned their ergonomics and made it user-friendly, where, at the time, people were having big problems with hang fires in shotguns. So you had to have a recoil lock of some sort. So a system that until the gun actually fired, you couldn't open the breech unless you intentionally hit some sort of button. The Marlin system still confuses people to this day. Like, it still is, like, it's worse than having one in the chamber, you know? It is the Marlin recoil unlock system is how do I put this? It's like an on-off conditional setting that isn't reset until you fully recycle the action. So in theory, you could chamber one, hit the recoil safety, and then it would disengage the recoil safety, and then you would fire it, or inertia safety is what I should be saying. You would fire it and get a hang fire or something and still be able to open it because you just happened to bump that button at the wrong moment. And that button always confuses people because you notice whenever you hand them Marlins, they try to hold the button down the entire time they're opening the gun. They don't realize it's a tap it and forget it. And it's because whatever's happening in there mechanically is antithetical to the way human brains work. The Winchester has this ridiculous, if you look at our animation on it, it's a ridiculous mechanism to have a button at the back that you hold down to open up the gun. And yet, that works. But the recoil, the inertial recoil lock is up at the front in the pump. And the way that you release the recoil lock is you just pump forward a little bit and then back. Now, a lot of people, when they handle that for the first time, they think, oh, this gun's got a little old, so you just kind of like rock it back and forth to get it open, right? That's not it, but it's an actual mechanism that's preventing the gun from opening until you push forward, because if you fire it under recoil, your left hand's going to stay still, the gun's going to go back, and therefore it's going to push forward relatively, right? And that's the inertial lock. Most people don't even know there is an inertial lock like that in the Winchester 97. And yet they've handled them plenty of times, and all they think is, well, you gotta wiggle it a little bit. So that means that the method that they use to make that gun work correctly with the inertial lock is so human-friendly that people don't even realize they're working the mechanism. They just think, it's the gun.
Wow.
Like, that's how
I didn't
good
know
of
that.
a design. Right, that's how good of a design that is. However, it's built on a very inefficient locking system, and bolt has to come screaming out the rear of the receiver, you know? And it's hammer fire, which is just weird. But also, turns out at that time especially, people really like hammer fire. And as a matter of fact, the reason why it was so popular for so long is that it was a hammer fire, because people like hammers. They can see the status of the firearm. There's something about it that lets them understand, like externalizing some of the mechanism helps them understand what the gun is doing, and has probably made them safer at handling it. So, despite its inefficiencies, it's human-friendly. Like, humans aren't efficient creatures, and they're not perfectly intelligent. So, sometimes the wrong engineering answer is the correct answer for the person.
I just saw old shotgun, and
Yeah. But
which is what most people see.
The Marlin is mechanically way more efficient and stronger than the Winchester 97. And it has technically a more efficient inertial lock system. An inertial lock system, by the way, that has proven the test of time, because to be honest with you, the Marlin's inertial lock system tends to break. It wears in one particular spot. I shouldn't say break, but it just stops engaging. And then people panic because they're like, oh no, the inertial lock doesn't work. And the answer is, it doesn't matter. No one's made a shotgun with an inertial lock since the 1920s, because the smokeless powder is no longer a problem. It used to be, just so you know, early smokeless powder used to be very hydroscopic. It would take on water easily. And so the shells would being paper shell, and even with the wax coating, they would still take on atmospheric moisture. And so you would get a lot of either hang fires or, just squibs or whatever. You get low power bursts, you get, lack of fire, but then you being a pump action, you're running it fast, right? So you're fire, let's say you're slam firing, you fire two, the third one, you hit the primer, and then you start pumping, and it's already unlocked the breech, but it waits a second before it goes off. So it's like, snap, you're opening the breech without realizing it hasn't fired, and then boom, it goes off. Well, your gun's unlocked, so it's blowing the bolt back in your face. So that's why you had to have the inertial lock. That doesn't happen anymore. Modern ammo doesn't do that. The powders are all figured out. They either don't go bang, or they go bang. Hang fires are kind of a thing of the past, unless you're dealing with really old military surplus ammo made in Iran or something. So that inertial lock is no longer necessary. So people are always scared to use the Marlin shotguns. Why? They have they actually can't even release the firing pin unless it's locked. The thing that is broken, the lock that's broken, is the inertial lock, and you're using modern ammo, so who cares? Also, even if you're using hang fire ammo, as long as you don't pump until after it goes bang, who cares? But people don't understand that, so they panic. So everyone thinks the Marlins are unsafe to this day on the internet. Oh, they're unsafe. They're unsafe. No, they're not. They're fine. But you guys don't understand how they work. Meanwhile, the Winchester has a similar system. You don't know whether it's working or not, because you just pump the gun. So it's like a better engineered firearm has gotten a worse reputation because it's harder to use by people. Well, not even harder to use, harder to understand. Like there's something about it people just don't understand. So it got a bad rep. And the one that's frankly inferior was focused on being usable by people and therefore got a good rep.
That is wild. I guess that brings up an interesting question then of like, the Marlin is very misunderstood. What are some other like, and you were talking about like the Mauser Nagant, and what are some misunderstood guns that you've, I mean, I know there's plenty, but like.
But that's the kind of my career. It's just being like, hold on guys, this isn't how it works.
Yeah. Well, like the one I think of is the Shosha, because like between your videos and Ian's videos and some of the other people that have done them, I've kind of realized they don't seem to be quite as terrible as a lot of people believe. I mean, obviously they're not great, but...
The problem is the failure rate on them was unacceptable. The issue you're having is, you can almost guarantee the number one problem with the Shosha was quality control, right? That's almost always the problem. Whenever you look at Tauruses, right? Tauruses were great until they weren't, and it was all quality control. You're cranking these out at wartime. It's a bicycle factory. You're trying to get as many on the front line as you can. Everybody's sort of built to get as many through the door as possible as the reward goal. And then the ones that failed and broke were just junked. So the problem we run into as modern historians is every Shosha that exists is one that didn't break down. Like the only ones left are the best ones made. Because the ones that broke down in war, they got rid of them. And these things got recycled out to Finland. They got recycled out to Belgium. Shoshas got resold many times over to other active war zones. And so they had plenty of chances to, it's natural selection, right? Only the strongest Shoshas survive. So they did have a unacceptable failure rate. However, their failure rate was, this is one of those brutal things, right? You say, okay, we've made 6 times the number of light machine guns as the Germans, and as a consequence, 1 in 6 sucks. So that means we still beat the Germans by 5x, right? That's good. Except if you're like the one of that 6 that's in the middle of a war zone and your shit doesn't work, then it's like, and so then you go, well, that's not fair. You should have made sure that all of them that went out were perfect, because then those guys got killed. But for every one of those guys that got killed in that group, you also ended up with 4 more that were capable of going out and deploying against emplaced machine guns and saving hundreds of other lives. So it becomes a really difficult assessment to make when you really start breaking it down, because it's a tragedy for an individual, but a salvation for a group. Like, what do you do? But then the problem is the guys come back. They had to run those guns. Those guns were temperamental and weird compared to other guns, so they just shit talked them. And so we're like, wow, there's and that's where we got our information, right? Because the French are notoriously bad about giving up firearms information. A lot of stuff stuff from before the First World is still in secret archives. Like in the U.S. And in a lot of other countries, when confidential material expires, it just becomes public domain. In France, you have to actually specifically request the confidential material to be put back into the public domain. How do you know?
Yeah, how do you know what's confidential?
Right. So there's tons of things hidden away that are marked confidential that will be forever hidden away until somebody knows to ask the question. So that means that the American vision of the Shosha was defined by American soldiers coming back and being like, what a piece of crap that was. And we kind of extrapolate that and saying that the 30-06 one was the worst, but most of our guys were fielded 8mm. We had 30-06 ones made and they were given to us, sure. But people keep forgetting that, and it wasn't a very popular topic, but for some reason people forget that Americans fought with foreign ammunition most of the time. So until the very end. At the very end, all of a sudden our stuff showed up and then we just started hurling our material everywhere like we usually do. But they get World War I and II confused too, because American material was everywhere in World War II and much more quickly. And like once the Americans start deploying, they deploy with American equipment, whereas like you forget how long Americans fought with foreign equipment in World War I. So the point is, the Shosha itself is a miracle that it works, but also like it's a good gun because it solves the problem it was out to solve, but it's still not a great gun. Like it's better than, like, as an army it's great. As an individual, it's like, can I have something else? To be honest with you, the biggest problem with the Shosha is post-war use of it as a light machine gun.
Okay.
because it like the BAR, they're both walking fire guns, which is a concept that was almost immediately abandoned by warfare.
Right.
But the BAR 1918, not the 8. This is the other thing, is people always think of like the later BAR.
The World War II BARs.
Right, which actually a very different animal in many ways. But it is such a different animal because they tried to make the BAR 1918 into a light machine gun, which I'm going to be honest with you, sucked at. You know, like the Germans really led the way on what a light machine gun was by World War II. And people went, oh yeah, that's a lot better. But the Shoshan and the BAR are unfairly called light machine guns because that's how we categorize things, you know, now. And I mean, even then they might have called it a light machine gun or light machine gun, but the doctrine was not the same. The doctrine was walking fire. Like stand up, shoot from the hip while advancing. Every time your left foot hits the ground, you fire one round. Which is why you have these limited capacity magazines. It's why you have the narrow light gun that's almost like they're trying to make it as close to the weight of a regular rifle as possible. No cooling systems, really, you know. And if you watch Project Lightning, those two guns dominate walking fire because that's like they do exactly what they were designed for. Yeah, they suck at so many other things, but they're great for walking fire, and they're both pretty quick to reload when you're standing. The Shoshan's a little slow. Like the Shoshan's a lot slower to reload sitting than standing, I think, or laying prone and standing.
Just because of the way the Half Moon magazine goes.
Yeah. And it's just like it's designed for you to walk around with it, and then also do all these other things, which is the problem. Like they got split, right? It's like, okay, make it so that you can walk around. Also, it needs to do all this other stuff.
Yeah. Also, make it so you can mount it. Also, make it so you can crouch with it. Yeah.
Yeah. You've basically told them to design an impossible gun. So they hedged to the one side, which was mobility. And then now you're mad at them years later because they didn't do the thing you wanted them to do. And you're like, well, no, they did do half of their mission correct. You just gave them two impossible missions together. Most people have not had a BAR 1918 or a Shoshan in their hands, let alone walking fired it, having run various light machine guns. I assure you, the walking fire with the BAR and the Shoshan is astronomically better than any other light machine gun I've ever encountered, because they're friggin'. I mean, once you walking fire with those things, you know they're made for it.
You get it, yeah. What would you say was the worst machine gun for that?
I'm kind of tempted to like. It is really tempting to develop some sort of. I guess you could do it with a FAL. If you guys want to get a flavor for it, go do walking fire with a FAL. It'd probably be the closest. It's like a semi-auto FAL, you could probably get away with it. Just fire a shot from the hip on your left foot. Do this outside in a safe environment with low range. You know, pick a target on the ground like a watermelon. Or
Let's
something.
not get in trouble or hurt.
Yeah, you guys are gonna get yelled at. I really recommend a good berm. But like I think with a FAL, you could probably get away with the feel for it, because the FAL and the Shoshan feel very similar to me in a lot of ways.
I guess I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah, just in the long narrowness. Like I've often make the joke that the FAL is everything the Shoshan was trying to be.
I guess, man, now thinking about it, like there are a lot of like ergonomic and mechanical similarities. Yeah.
I mean, okay, not long recoil, not blah blah. I'm not talking about like the mechanisms themselves, but just like the shape, the barrel length, the cartridge power, the magazine capacity. Like, just tell me functionally why the FAL couldn't have replaced the Shoshan in World War I and performed exactly the same but better, you know? But it's because they have similar conundrums, which is like, we need a full powered infantry rifle cartridge. We need this to behave like an infantry rifle, but also like a light machine gun. And the FAL gets the same rap, where it's not really a perfect infantry rifle. It's not really a perfect light machine gun. Because it's like the Shoshan and the FAL have a lot of comparisons to each other in terms of like, okay, how are we going to get all this stuff in one package? And you're like, you don't? You really don't?
Considering all the different guns you've gotten to take a look at and gotten your hands on and looked at over the years, what would you say is one of or some of the weirdest mechanisms or just weirdest builds you've seen?
This is difficult. One of my favorites is mostly because of the user comments, but when we did my brain just froze. The Lancaster, the 4-barrel.
The Howdah pistol?
Yeah.
Okay.
The entire reason that gun existed is because people didn't trust revolvers, so we immediately take the grip plates off, and inside is a tiny revolver. You know, like it's just like they just move the revolving mechanism.
So where you couldn't actually see it spinning, and then okay.
Right, and even the lock work, you know, just the way the hammer works and everything. it's a revolver lockwork. You know, you're just going, you guys really got away from the revolver, didn't you? You just made a less efficient revolver. And so people like, the comments blew up where it's like, hey, this what a lie. There's a revolver inside there. So that was a funny one. Struggling to think. Honestly, the weirdest stuff I've seen is stuff that was never made. Like, I guess if I had to think of like the strangest firearms that exist that we've shot, the Frommer stop has to be up there. Like using like a K31 bolt in a 32 ACP pistol for reasons.
There's way too much going on for how small of a round that is.
Yeah, it's 32 ACP. Like, what were you planning, my man? Like, this just, and it's like a tiny little K31 in there. You know what I mean? Like, it's just
that was the one that they tried to make a little aircraft gun by just turning them upside down, right?
Yeah. They like two of them upside down to make a little submachine gun thing. God, I'd love to lay hands on one of those. That's got to be ridiculous.
Well, just get two Frommer stops and build it yourself.
Not only that, but long recoil too. Like, just long recoil for a 32. Like, what? It's so much effort. Like, so much effort for 32. Okay, and by the way, the FN 1900, perfectly fine, same size, blowback. Why?
And worked fine.
It's one of those things where I'm like, sometimes, man, you just have a patent and you're just trying to justify it. I swear to God. Because, like, why else would this exist? It's so weird. And then, like, the Steyr Piper, where it's just like, no, we don't need an extractor. And you're just like, you're going, well, just put an extractor on it. No, it can work without extractor. We have these gas grooves and stuff. Bo, it's like a penny. Put an extractor on there. It'll stop malfunctioning.
I think that's something a lot of people forget is how much firearm engineering is influenced by, like you were talking earlier, patents, and also just like the necessity, the availability, and like, wartime effects, like the Tokarev, the TT-33 Tokarev. They were trying to get rid of them right until World War II started, and they were like, well, I guess we're stuck with these now. We don't have time to make something new.
But we ran into them, like, the Brits were struggling with the Lee Enfield right up until World War I, and then afterwards, like, well, now we're used to it. Like, this is our friend now, and you're going, that's because you guys forgot how hard it was to get tooled up and train people to make this stupid thing. It was one of the most difficult rifles to make of the war. Yeah, they're going, can we set up manufacture in the U.S.? No, because it would take the entire war to teach them how to make this thing, because it's so bespoke and weird. Like, the Lee Enfield is not a holistic system, and people really forget that. Like, that's probably the Mosin and Lee Enfield mix-up messes with my head so much. Because people are just like, oh, the Mosin's garbage and it's simple, and I'm like, no, it's okay and it's complicated. Like, it's not great, but it's okay and it's complicated. And then they worship the Lee Enfield, and it's just like, okay, it runs pretty slick, and it has 10 rounds. That we can agree with. Everything else about it is unbelievably weird. And then they get all mad, and I'm going, okay, so explain the number 4 then. Because what they do in the number 4, they ditched that weird barrel that had to have the dampener. They made the receiver more rigid and actually integrated the stripper clip guide instead of just welding it on because it was an afterthought. And what did they keep? They kept the 10 rounds, and they kept the kind of slick bolt. Okay, cool. And then I try to explain to people.
Those are the basic things any bolt-action rifle should have anyway.
Right, and then you try to explain to people, you're like, it's not good for a rimless cartridge. Like, they saw so many of the Lee Enfield problems are solved by the fact that it has a rimmed cartridge, because then the gas mitigation is taken care of by the rim, right? And they go, well, that's not true because you could get NATO ones from India. And I'm going, yeah, you just go ahead and fill like 1 million of those into a war zone and see what's going to happen. You're going to have all sorts of gas, like, especially with bad ammo. That's, again, it's another modern problem. It's like, well, I've got an Indian one. It's never been a problem. Like, yeah, you're feeding it Lake City, like NATO or whatever, that doesn't explode randomly.
That has much better quality control, yeah.
World War I Winchester ammo would occasionally pop 1917 receivers. That's how bad the quality control was. Like, you guys got to understand. It's I don't know how to explain it. It's just like, you don't know how good your e-brake is until you pull it while doing 60 miles an hour. And you shouldn't pull your e-brake at 60 miles an hour to find out. But you better hope it's engineered to work that way, because you might need it one day, right? It's the same thing with gas mitigation. It's like, well, I've never had any problems. It's like, because you haven't had a failed case in your face. Guns that don't deal with gas mitigation well, we had failed cases in Arisaka. Nothing happened because they vented right out the top of the gun like they're supposed to. I've had a failed case in a Vetterli. it blew wood shards into my face.
Oh my
Because
gosh.
it doesn't have any sort of gas mitigation system that was reliable. It's a safety system. But the Lee Enfield is just so ad hoc. Like, if you follow the history of the Lee Enfield, they're just like, it's still not working. Add more crap. And they just keep bolting stuff to it.
Yeah, they kept just adding more features, and eventually it just kind of worked.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, that's fine. It's the same as like the Winchester 97 story. Eventually it gets to the point where it's usable. But that doesn't mean it was some divine invention from the beginning. It means that you coaxed it over the finish line.
Well, and also, if it was some divine gun, why does nobody still emulate that setup anymore?
Yeah, it's weird that nobody builds a DMR off the Lee Enfield system. I mean, they did at one point. I know people are gonna be like, well, in World War II, it's like, yeah, because the machines were set up.
They didn't have time to make something new.
Yeah, they're not gonna design. People do not understand how much effort it goes into making it a totally different receiver and bolt and everything else. Like, you need orders in the millions, and they're not building millions of sniper rifles. They're building,
Maybe a couple
one
hundreds.
for every like 150 rifles, maybe. That'd be a lot.
Speaking of World War II rifles and World War I rifles, we were talking about the Mosin, we were talking about the Lee Enfield. What do you think is some of the big reasons that the Mauser has kind of risen to the standard bolt action?
The Mauser is, how do I put this? It is a micro version of what happened with the Lee Enfield, where you have a core solution. The core solution is actually pretty smart, but you keep massaging it over and over again, but you're doing it down at the lockwork level. Because you see it with if you really pay attention to the evolution of the Mauser, it's like you have this safety flag / bolt action, okay. But then as the times change, you kind of get with the times and you put locking lugs on there. You put a cocking shroud with a separate interior cocking piece and everything, because that's how your safety's always worked. And it just kind of goes along until it runs into problems, and then they engineer around the problems over and over and over again. And in that regard, you end up with a very robust but fairly complicated system that has gas mitigation, it has anti-out-of-battery rotation, it has forward locking lugs. It has, honestly, probably the best feature of the Mauser is the Sublime extractor. Like, just that over-engineered extractor ends up being extremely reliable. They were early adopters of controlled feed, so that you don't end up jamming one around into the other while you're loading. They just basically, every problem that comes into the bolt action world, Mauser stops and goes, okay, how are we going to fix this? And then even what he doesn't fix, other countries tend to fix on their own and send it back to Mauser for production, and then Mauser goes, oh, we can keep doing that too. So it really is a gun that wasn't invented overnight. It was refined over, 2 decades. But it earns the reputation because of that refinement, and it adopted smart decisions fairly early on. That means that it doesn't see these radical, weird external changes like we'd expect. But I mean, people forget Mauser tried to float the barrel to deal with barrel expansion under heat, and then so they went with the barrel jacket for a while. But then they immediately figured out stepped barrels were better for heat expansion of the stock. So Mauser's going over to stepped barrels in a time when the Mosin doesn't have stepped barrels. The Lee Enfield didn't have a step barrel; they just had the Mosin. I guess you're just gonna miss. In the Lee Enfield, it's like, well, we'll put a spring dampener in here, which is really crazy. No one talks about that thing. No one seems to notice there's like a piece of metal and a spring in the forestock of that thing. So the Mauser is a very thoughtful, careful rifle. And then you take those considerations in hand and you export them. And the exporting is really key, because Mauser they tried to sell it everywhere they could. And DWM was very vicious about getting out there and fighting for territory. And they went blow to blow with OEWG to the point that OEWG Steyr has to produce Mausers to compete with Mauser. So now you have 2 companies selling Mausers all over the place. And, you would have had, and the really big thing is, post-war, both of those countries are told you can't export any. Well, the sort of abandoned stepchild of all of them, FN, who had started producing Mausers for the Belgian government, but then were viciously taken over by Obendorf, or not Obendorf, by DWM. Actually, that's how it became. Ludwig Lowe took over FN and then became DWM to consolidate their arms industry. But when they took over, when the German industry took over the Belgian industry, they told them, you're not making export Mausers anymore. You're just making them for the Belgian government. Well, the minute World War One ended, and the Germans and Austrians couldn't make Mausers, all of a sudden you have this plant that's experienced in making Mausers sitting there that is allowed because they're on the Entente side. So then they started exporting Mausers. And then you see them exporting them into Yugoslavia, and then Czechoslovakia, who broke off from Germany during that period, had German industry that was for making Mausers. So what do? They kept making Mausers for export. So now you have FN and Czechoslovakia competing to export Mausers. And even if you want a different gun, like there was an attempt to bring back the Mannlicher family, which was very weird, and the Colombian Madsons were made, Didn't really work out well because it was an inferior design to begin with, but also because the market dominance of sort of FN and Bruno on export was crazy. And so once you have so many of them out there, it kind of becomes the standard. And to be honest with you, there's very little you could do to improve the Mauser. I do think you can improve the Mauser, the 98 action. As a matter of fact, I have a video coming out on an improved Mauser 98 action. It's the Manchurian Mauser. But the Manchurian Mauser is essentially a legacy of a prototype that was a trench adapted Mauser by hybridizing a Type 38 Japanese quote-unquote Arisaka. I tend to call him the Nambu rifle because he's really the one that invented them. But the Japanese Type 38 was hybridized with the Mauser 98 in Austria as an experiment. And that whole thing ends up eventually being produced in Manchuria, and that has some significant improvements over the Mauser 98. So, to be honest with you, I still think that if I were to go back in time and try to make a better Mauser, I would probably just make a better Nambu Type 38 now. There's elements of the Type 38 that are far superior and much more efficient and still get all the same things done. And so, but Japan wasn't a big export country. They tried selling it to, Thailand. They tried selling it into Manchuria. They did get one customer. Shanxi was a customer in China that actually bought their old. It appears they bought their old assembly line from the first gen of Type 38s. But I guess because everyone was trying to westernize, no one really wanted to buy from Japan. And also getting in bed with Japan at that time was very dangerous because you ended up in their sphere of influence. Look at Manchuria. So, the Type 38 never became a major export rifle and is largely sort of discarded, honestly, on a sort of like Western-focused basis because the Arisaka actually served really well in World War I for Russia and other countries. But I don't know. I think the Type 38 might be the only rifle to give the Mauser a run for its money for all of the sub features working exactly the way that you want them to work and being more efficient. It's just that it was never a big export industry like the Mauser was. FN created the model 1924 export Mauser, like Yugoslavia adopted. They made it slightly more efficient in that they used a shorter action, which means less metal. It's slightly more efficient. The problem was it wasn't backwards compatible with the Gewehr 98 bolt, which was everywhere in the surplus market at that time, right? So parts were available. So they tried selling the model 1924, and it wasn't a big seller until they made the Model 30, which used the same action length and therefore could use the Gewehr 98 bolt. And then all of a sudden they sold way more of the M30s. So that tells you even trying to make one little change to the action length to save a little metal and time turned out to be the wrong choice because it didn't have backwards compatibility, which is also a good reason why the Mauser stuck it out so long.
Fun question now. What would you say, what movie or TV show would you say depicts World War I warfare the best?
I got nothing. This is the worst question for me. So I'm the guy that just doesn't watch movies.
Okay.
It's like sitting still for 2 hours is impossible for me. So I've seen like less than... If the average human being of my age has seen X number of movies, I've seen 0.01x. And to be honest with you, I'm trying to recall, and I think I've seen a few scenes of Charlie Chaplin Goes to War. And that's about it. I've seen the previews for all, what was it that came out a couple years ago that everybody's all hyped about. People send me screenshots and stuff and is this model correct? I'm like, no, because it never is.
Well, there was the Kingsman, which was World War I, but it's so over the top. And then the All Quiet on the Western Front came out a couple years ago.
Never saw it.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one either. But
I didn't even see the one with the horse. I haven't seen that one.
War Horse?
Yeah, the problem is, more so now after I've started doing this, I really can't watch them because I see like the previews and I just go, I can't deal with this. Like,
Why?
I think it's so war movies especially get so weirdly emotional, and having been around, like, I mean, you know me, I work with a lot of veterans and things like that, and it's the dramatization of it and filtering it through actors. I can smell an act from so far away. I don't know if it's my kind of autism, but I kind of resent acting. I don't know how to explain it. I'm really bad at things that aren't sort of intentionally loose comedies. And even then, I don't want to watch them all that often, but occasionally, that's the thing I have the easiest time with. But there's something about like performances that make me uneasy because there's just an inherent insincerity in them, and I'm just really bad at consuming media. I have some sort of turbo autism that doesn't let me relax and watch things like that.
I've never thought about it that way, but I think I understand what you mean.
Yeah, because there's something in my brain where it's like I'm supposed to be like, you're tugging at my heartstrings because this guy is, his best friend died and his mom has cancer or whatever. And I'm going, no, that guy got paid $3.2 million.
Yeah, this guy's pretending.
He's not crying at all. He's very happy. Like, I can't suspend my brain. It kind of does this like vibration between reality and the fiction, and it makes me nauseous. Like, I don't know how to explain it.
I think I understand what you mean.
I like schlock movies better, weirdly. Like, if I get lured into something, it either needs to be sort of like, either it has to be like high art or it has to be pure schlock, and then anything in between makes me uncomfortable. I don't know how to explain it. And I still don't watch a lot of movies. Like, give me like Charles Bronson. That's easier. I don't feel lied to during that movie. You know what I mean? It's just like, yeah, now he's gonna shoot everybody.
When it's so over the top that it's easy to check out. That's what you want.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've said in the past you don't really like revealing what sort of guns are on your like wish list because, people steal them from you or whatever.
Yeah, my real wish list is a secret.
Having said that, are there any guns that have been on your wish list that you have now had the opportunity to see or buy or use?
Oh, yeah. Well, my wish list has always evolved, right? I was a World War II collector when we started all this, and I never really finished that collection. I liquidated a lot of it trying to get the show started. So there's pieces of that now. It's so funny, but there's Grail stuff where you're going, oh, I really wish I had one of those, that have now just surfed right past me, and I'm going, oh, well, I guess I don't care about that anymore because I'm not collecting that way. On the World War I style, there's a number of rare rifles and things like that I've always wanted to get in my hands. And then I swear to you, every time I'll make a big financial decision for the show. We don't have a great income stream. So I'll make a big financial decision for the show and I'll be broke. And then inevitably that's when some white whale turns up and I go, are you kidding me? There's only been like one of these listed every 4 years. And they always list at auction right after I've spent all my money. Like every time. So there's still a number of and you guys can probably suss it out from sort of the rarest of the World War I stuff. And I'm just sitting there going, I will never own this because I'm always broke right when it shows up at auction. I have gotten lucky, but the way I get lucky is I tend to be the only one looking for things, which is why I don't reveal my list. So, I've bumbled into I have a Luxembourg Nagant revolver, which is...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, that's cool. I wish I had the little bayonet for it, but, whatever. One day I'll find somebody that has one that'll loan it to me and I'll make a reproduction of that.
But who else is looking for stuff like that?
Yeah, but see, the minute you mention it on something like this, somebody else is like, well, I might want to have that. Yeah, one other bidder, you know what I mean? If it doesn't matter how rare it is, if you're the only bidder, you're okay. And I've always been I've never been a very wealthy collector, so that's how I've done it. I have a lot of pieces that I've spent $100, $200, $300. We were talking about the Alofs. I spent like $400 on it. Because no one knew to look for an Alof. So then I do a video.
Yeah, now everyone.
Imagine if I had found an Alof and not owning it, filmed it, and then went, "Hey guys, I really want one of these." I just shot myself in the foot. And I have many times with our show, by telling people things exist. But
I don't want you to give away any of your secrets and.
Well, a lot of it's been in episodes though. Like the revolver series is interesting because I've been singing little deals on revolvers, and then that's probably the one place where I'm actually affected. Because people always say, "Oh, you guys ruined the market by talking about this stuff." I think revolvers is the one place where I might have actually ruined the market to some degree. Not the British stuff. The British stuff is still priced so high by most resellers that it's insane. Like you go find Enfields and things, and they were already turning $2,000. when nobody knew what they were. Which, by the way, I'm confused. I'm not sure who was buying them before I made the videos, because it seemed like nobody recognized them, and yet they were going for big dollars. So I can't get in trouble for those. The British stuff was always expensive for some reason. I have no idea why. But there's starting to be some European stuff that's gone up a little bit. Even then, though, me talking about obscure Dutch revolvers has not ruined the price of Dutch revolvers. It just hasn't. There's some stuff I tracked down most recently. I got some very early French stuff. The French had Alof show, 1858, which was a pinfire. A lot of people don't realize they actually had several versions of it. But when they converted over to centerfire, they actually adopted a modified centerfire Alof show cartridge at first, and a triple action Alof show revolver. Those are rare and basically non-existent in the US, but I've managed to import a few because they're antiques. And so those have been some good finds that I didn't really have to compete, because I was only competing in the European market. And I have a full set, so now I'm safe to talk about those. But what they did is, when they converted the pinfire Alof show to centerfire, they also converted it into a single and double action, triple action Lockwood, which is really weird. And they did it by sort of adding a distended plate to the bottom of the frame. And so I have one of those. I can't wait to. The problem is I have to build up our pinfire cartridges and go through the whole Alof show history, which I am planning to do next year. But then eventually I get to the point where I can do a centerfire, Alof show conversion that's now converted to double action, which is the most bizarre thing, and yet was militarily adopted. And then the Alof show 1870 is the gun that they were doing that to keep up with. And that is one of the most comfortable handguns ever made. It has a great grip on it. Oh yeah, it's a beautiful grip. Very modern. It's like a wood hoe grip. Go look at like a Alof show 1870, like a French 1870 Alof show. Unbelievably good grip. Never seen again. Like, the French Navy had them, and then they came in and they're like, here, now you have to take this Chamelot Delvine. And I can guarantee you their groupings went down. Because like the Chamelot Delvine has nothing on the grip on this thing. Yeah, I think in the revolver side I've stumbled into some pretty cool stuff because no one's looking. But that's been about the best that I've been able to do, is sort of just be ahead of the wave. I'm trying to think. There's definitely been a couple pieces where I've lucked into them because, I know absolutely the best piece that I have. I put away a curious little piece that somebody, actually a friend of mine had it. It was a Danish revolver, but it didn't fit the pattern. And so what this was is, it was how do I explain this? It's a pseudo-Adams derived pinfire revolver that the Danes had. Then they converted them to centerfire, but they did it really late, like in the late 1890s. They were still converting these things. And when they did it, they had folding triggers like a Bodeo, so they got rid of those and they put fixed triggers with a trigger guard. This one still had a folding trigger, and yet was converted and had military markings. And so it was a bit of a mystery, and a friend had it for probably too much money, because the takedown on them is very weird, and someone got confused and like clearly had like a ball peen hammer trying to get it open, so there's all these dents on the frame. It looked like a dog chewed on it. And I was like, I don't know, man. I probably shouldn't spend this money, but I just something's tweaking me. So I bought it and I put it away. And as I made friends with someone, and we're going through the notes in Denmark, getting books back and forth, going through the collector's journals. And finally, I find an article written in the 70s from this one guy, and it's like this 2-paragraph article essentially. And he goes, "Hey, over in Copenhagen, we have that one revolver in the museum that everybody thought was weird because it still had a folding trigger, but it was converted to centerfire, and it had these other unique features that were unique to the one that I have as well." And he goes, "I finally figured it out. I found a line item in here." With communication between the Danish government, the regular Danish army, and the Danish West Indies. And so Denmark had their little Danish West Indies. They had a force out there that had their own revolvers that were pinfire. The conversion system came up and they wrote them out and they said, "Hey, send in your revolvers. We're going to convert them to centerfire." And they wrote back and said, we can't send them in, then we won't have revolvers. You go ahead and convert, centerfire revolvers there, and then send them out to us. Then we'll send ours back. And they're like, okay. And they're like, by the way, don't do the trigger guard thing, because they had sent them a sample. They're like, don't do we want the folding trigger guard. It doesn't say why, but it's probable that all their leather and stuff, or the way they were racking them, was set up for the trigger guard was in the way for some reason. So they go, Okay, cool. And there's like an inventory, and the inventory is 48 pieces. One of 48. I know I have the one, and then there's one that apparently is in a Danish museum somewhere, and that's all I've ever heard of them. And I was just like, okay, I'm glad I stuck that away before. Like sometimes you just get that little like I'm spending too much money, but I think I'm on the trail of something.
Something was telling you,
Yeah.
Man, what a gem! That is cool.
And that gun, I really want to cover it so bad because when they did the conversion, the action's so weak, and they had this mandatory muzzle velocity, and the only way they could get the muzzle velocity up high enough with that weak action was to have a jacketed wooden bullet.
What?
So that gun came with a holster and ammo, which is really makes me happy because the holster's on titanium, because that's the whole point of it having the folding trigger. And but it came with 5 or 6 rounds of the ammo, and you hold it and you're like, is there powder in here? Why is it so like it's lighter than 32 ACP, and yet it's like an 11 millimeter cartridge, and you're just going, what is going? Is this empty dummy ammo? No, that's the live load. It's like it's a fast wooden bullet.
That is goofy.
With a jacket. It's a jacketed wooden bullet.
And yeah, I'm assuming you've not shot them yet.
No, I'm not shooting that ammo. I gotta figure out how to make a jacketed wooden bullet. I have now. You can find that if you're looking around, especially in Europe, and you're willing to import. Antiques are not that hard to import. If you're looking around in Europe and you're looking at antiques, you can find the centerfire conversions with the trigger guard. That's not hard. I have one of those. That did not take me long to find one. Actually, I already had one when I got curious about the one without the trigger guard. But so I do have one of those. It's not the riskiest gun to try to load up and figure out how to fire, and it's the same thing, jacketed wooden bullet BS. So I do have one I can work with, but just what a weird story.
And just a neat thing that you're kind of the only one that gets to show off.
Yeah. It's like I looked at it and went 1 to 48. I was like, I don't regret that price now. Like it's just even in its beat up shape, like as dogged as it is, I'm like, I'm gonna hold on to this.
Your intuition paid off.
Now I've shot myself in the foot for finding a nicer condition one.
I don't know why it's the U.S. military a lot of times too, but just the weird micro changes and micro adjustments they make in the same gun over time, just because of this special case or this small group of people that needed something a little bit different.
The U.S. is exceptional at this, or it was, because we had a frontier army. So you're like, here's your 2,000 rifles. Bring them back in 5 years. Because you just send them out to the far west or whatever. Or you'd send them out on various boats where they only have to be consistent to each other within the boat. So that having the cellular model system didn't really cause big problems because we didn't have a large standing army. Then we try to go, but you see it though, the U.S. knows that this is not good. So they come up, they don't do it to the Springfield 1903. They get to the Springfield 1903 and they're like, we gotta stop doing this. It's a really bad habit. And then they immediately do it again with the 1903-06, which no one calls it that, but that's what it is. And what everybody thinks of as the Springfield 1903 is the 1903-06. You guys just aren't aware of it. So we did do it. We were like, no, wait. Let's change everything real quick. Okay, good. Then a year later.
Oh, wait, yeah.
Yeah. And then finally they stopped. They finally friggin' stopped long enough to go into World War II without insanity.
Well, Othais, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to chat with me and just talk about some weird guns. I hope everyone watching learned something. And if you haven't already, make sure you check out C&Rsenal. Othais does a lot of great work. His team, they work really hard on the stuff they do. So make sure you check them out and see what they're up to. Othais, thank you for being here, and I'll see everybody next time.
Yeah, bye, I'm leaving.
No, don't go.